Jesus had a lot of people that were following him around everywhere he went. We see this through the Gospels, that the more Jesus traveled around and was teaching and was performing miracles and doing great things, and more people were hearing about Jesus and seeing what Jesus was doing and listening to his teachings, that Jesus actually had, time and time again, as we see, multitudes, a whole lot of people who were coming and following him physically, who were coming to see, to hear, but not everybody who was there physically were really following Jesus spiritually or from their hearts. And Jesus knew this. Jesus often challenged the people. Jesus challenged his own disciples, those who were following Jesus as disciples. But we find in Luke chapter 14 one occasion where Jesus sees so many people that are, that have been following him in this area, and he wants to really get the people to stop and think about what they're doing, why they're doing it. Are they really, truly willing to do it and to be a true disciple, to be a true follower of Jesus? And that's in Luke chapter 14, picking up in verse 25. Luke 14:25, when we're told that great multitudes were going with Jesus, and Jesus turns and begins to speak to them. Try to picture this, in your mind, that Jesus walking around, and, Jesus and his disciples, and there's all these people that are following behind, and Jesus just stops and he turns, looks at the people, and begins to speak to them. And he starts by saying this: "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple." Now, folks, Jesus didn't mince words. Jesus didn't beat around the bush. Jesus was very strong, very straightforward and clear in many of his teachings and statements to the people. Here is a strong statement from Jesus where he tells those who are following him where he was going. He says, if you truly want to come to me, but you're not willing to put me first before even your family, even before yourself. We read this and we see where Jesus says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, what does Jesus mean by hating them? Does Jesus really mean that we're to hate everybody else and only love him? No, his point is this: Jesus, God, has to come first. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his family and even his own life, what are we told to do? We're told to deny self. We're to put Jesus before self. But Jesus is telling them and telling us still today, if we are not going to put Christ before our family, before friends, before ourselves, then we cannot be his disciple. Jesus has to come first. If we're truly going to be disciples, followers of Jesus, we've got to put him first. And be willing, verse 27, to bear our cross. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Jesus was telling them in this that if you're truly going to follow me, it means bearing a cross. That's not pleasant. That's not encouraging. That means it's going to be hard. There's going to be challenges. You're going to have to take up your cross and follow me. And if you're not willing to bear a cross, if you're not willing to bear your cross for me, then you cannot be my disciple. So then he says you've got to think and count, we would say count the cost. He gives some illustrations of this. Verse 28, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it. Lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." Jesus says, think about it practically. He talks about building a tower, or really any project, home improvement, whatever the case may be, whatever you say, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But you don't actually first sit down, figure out what materials you need, figure out how much money it's going to cost, time, all that stuff. And you just start doing it without planning, without thinking. But then it gets hard, it gets laborious, you don't have your materials, and then you can't finish. Jesus says people are going to mock you, say, he set out to do this great thing, but he didn't prepare, he didn't finish. He had to quit and give up. Or what king, verse 31, another way to look at this, or what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. If you're, like a king, if he's going to go out to war, well, you got to know who you're dealing with. You got to know, do you have enough men? Do you have the weapons? Can you actually beat this person you're going to fight? And if you don't prepare and you just go out to fight, but then you realize we're going to lose bad, and I surrender, let's make peace. That's not going to work either. Jesus is telling them, verse 33, the point of this is, so likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Jesus has to come first. If we're truly going to be a disciple of Jesus, a Christian, a follower of Christ, then we've got to put Jesus first and actually follow him. Giving up self, giving up things of this world, making sure that nothing comes between us and following Christ. Nothing comes between us and God. Jesus then finishes with another illustration of sorts. In verses 33, notice in talking about this and coming after him, bearing a cross, being a disciple, counting the cost, he then says in verses 34 and 35 that salt is good, right? Salt is effective. Salt has a purpose. Salt is good for, a variety of things. But if the salt has lost its flavor, how will it season anything? How shall it be seasoned? What good is salt rock without its saltiness? It is neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill, but men throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. What is it that Jesus is trying to get them and us to hear and understand? Well, even in this little illustration of salt, is salt, if it does not have its flavor, if it does not have its saltiness, if it becomes tasteless, it is useless. His point in this context with that is, if we're truly going to be disciples of Christ, if we're not willing to actually listen to him, follow him, and obey him, then we're not going to be disciples. Or another way to look at it is, we're going to be useless disciples. Disciples that are not worthy or qualified to be called a disciple of Christ. We've got to count the cost. We've got to leave all and follow Jesus to truly be his disciples. Again, there were a lot of people following Jesus, but not all of them were truly willing to follow Jesus. The same thing today, I think, is a lot of people claim to be disciples, to be followers of Christ, but they're not actually willing to listen to him. They're not actually following him. They're not actually living for him and putting him first. And I've got to make sure myself, if I claim to be a disciple of Jesus, are there people or things of this world or anything that is coming before Jesus that I need to give up, I need to turn away from, or I need to get my priorities straight in my life and to put God first, put Jesus first, to truly be his disciple? Am I useful? Am I a useful disciple and follower of Jesus by truly bearing my cross and giving my life to Him? We all need to examine ourselves and make sure that if we claim to be a Christian, a disciple, a follower of Christ, let's make sure we are actually being one, like Jesus says here. Make sure we're counting the cost. Make sure we're willing to do whatever it takes to follow Jesus. God bless.